Welcome to the Winner's Playbook with Steve and Josh. Disclaimer: the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.
Welcome back to the Winner's Playbook. I'm Josh Lee, and today I'm here with a special guest, not my regular co-host, Stephen Sloan. I'm actually here with Declan Edwards. Declan is known as the Happiness Guy. So he's a happiness researcher and founder of BU Happiness College, an organization that is growing global well-being by empowering people to thrive. On a day-to-day basis, Declan's work involves helping individuals learn how to better manage their mind and emotions, which is something I'm super interested in myself, as well as guiding workplaces to improve their culture and staff happiness. Declan, welcome to the Winner's Playbook, mate, and thank you for joining me today.
Mate, thank you so much. The pleasure's all mine.
Awesome. Well, mate, I want to rip sort of straight into it here. And, happiness is like, God, how do you define that? I don't know. And this is obviously something that, you've been working on cultivating and built obviously a business model around this. So if you don't mind, mate, just to kick off, could you give us a bit of the backstory of just kind of who you are and what's kind of brought you into where you are now and what you're doing?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think a lot of people meet me or come across my work and see that I'm sort of known these days as that happiness guy. And they go, man, this guy must have always been happy.
Yeah.
And that's so far from the truth. Like my
Yeah.
origin story and way I got into this field of research was actually because I spent a lot of my life, particularly my high school years, really struggling with a lack of direction and a lack of clarity around my sense of self. I look back on that time and describe myself almost as a human chameleon. I was really good at being the guy that I thought everyone else wanted me to be. And as a result, I started chasing other people's definitions for what a happy and successful life meant. I tried to people please my father and his idea of what a good career path was. I tried to people please my teachers. I tried to people please everyone around me. And as a result, I lost touch of who I was. And I got stuck on what I now know from the happiness research. We call it the hedonic treadmill. And we've all been on it before. Sometimes I still end up on it these days, but it's this idea of I'll be happy when.
Yeah.
Insert whatever you want afterwards, right?
Yeah.
We're always chasing happiness around the next achievement, the next goal, the next milestone, the next chapter. We never feel happy or good now. And so I did that for years. And the only place that landed me was I ended up, by the time I was 19, first year university, I was in and out of hospital with disordered eating, body dysmorphia, a lot of, self-doubt issues and really struggling with my sense of self. And I reached out. Thankfully, I got to this point where I went, I can't figure this out on my own. Like, I'm putting myself in a bad place here. I need some help. And I reached out to a man who had become my first ever coach and mentor, a man by the name of Sebastian Terry. He was based in Sydney at the time. And he was the first role model I kind of had who was really living life intentionally and by his definition of happiness and success.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I started being like, well, that's really interesting. And through those sort of conversations I was having with him, I realized that I'd been chasing self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, all these things that a lot of people want. They all start with the same damn word, which is self. And I went, how am I going to be confident in someone I don't know yet? How am I going to have worth and trust and love and care for a stranger? And so what that led to is me going, man, I need to figure out who I am and figure out what my definition of happiness is. And to dive into that, I started asking Seb and all these other coaches and mentors, what do you guys know that I don't? Seems like you have a bit of a toolkit that I wasn't given in life or in school. And this field of research called positive psychology kept coming up. This evidence-based scientific area of how do we study what makes life worth living? How do we study what makes us fulfill our potential, be the best version of ourselves? And so I dove into that. And a few years later, as I was studying that, went, I wish I learned these skills earlier. I wish there was a place where people could learn skills like emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion, our values, all these behavioral change areas, these soft skills they used to be called. And so we opened BU Happiness College, literally off that idea of, hey, imagine a college that was focused on helping people become happier humans, not just good employees. And I guess the rest is history. And as of today, as we're recording this, we're 7 years in now. So 7th birthday for BU Happiness College.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
very proud of the impact I've been able to make through that work.
Yeah, no, mate, that's a great initiative, and quite interesting. We weren't even chatting about this before we jumped on here, but Sebastian Terry, he's the guy that's got the bucket list, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct. You know it. There
and
you go.
I didn't know who he was before the conference, and he did the closing speech. He went through his whole story and how it's all came to be. And I think he lost a friend early on, and it made him like really question life. And then he kind of just went on this journey of like ticking off all of those things. And it was honestly like an amazing story, an amazing speech, and just like a great way to think about life. And he then started doing some things live on stage, and like it's obviously getting people out of their comfort zone. And I think it was a lady that had a fear of public speaking, and everyone submitted through their fears before the conference, and then he pulled them all up on the screen. And there was probably 300-400 odd people there in the room, and then he picked out that one and said, "All right, whose is that in the room?" And then pulled her out of the crowd, got her on stage, and said, "All right, now you gotta do it." And yeah, it was cool. Like amazing story. Love it. So it's quite interesting to see. There you go. So he was an early mentor of yours. Do you still chat with him a bit, or?
Yeah, I'm really close. He's like a big brother to me. Yeah,
Amazing.
been fortunate enough to go to Nepal with Seb and go to Everest Base Camp with.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
still a big part of my life.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm sure you've been asked this question 100 times, but like, what is the definition in your eyes of happiness? And like, I know it's different for everyone, but how do you kind of best try and describe that?
Yeah, it is a big question. It's one I get asked a lot. And to be honest, it's a question that we've been asking as a, species for thousands of years. You go
Mm,
back to the ancient Greek philosophers and they were sitting around going, what does it mean to live a happy life? What
yeah.
is happiness? And thankfully we're getting a bit closer to a definition thanks to positive psychology. I do say, there's no such thing as a one size fits all answer to how to be happy for 8 billion people on the planet.
Yep.
But what we do know is there are common threads. And so the common threads in terms of the most evidence-based recipe or starting point for a happy life is something called the Perma Model from positive psychology. It's basically 6 parts. It goes, hey, here are 6 foundations that you can lay if you want to live a really happy life. And then what you do with those foundations, well, that's up to you. Now you get to go play with it.
Hmm.
So in order, the first one is positive affect or positive emotion, which is just mean, hey, how do we cultivate and do things that help us feel good? Which on the surface seems silly and simple. It's like, oh, of course, a recipe for happiness. Step one, do things that make you feel good. But bloody hell, how often do we forget to do that in life?
Totally.
How often do we get stuck in the busyness of life and in all the demands of life, and we forget to just take time to do things that make us feel good and practice hobbies and interests, as an example. So positive affect is the first. Do things that make yourself feel good. You get to
Yep.
decide what they are. The second one, E, is engagement and flow. Now, this means do things that make you lose sense of self and sense of time, where you're fully immersed in the moment. Some people get it through art or creative pursuits. Some people get it through sport. I get a lot of it through my work, and through playing music. Whatever it is for you, when you lose sense of self and time. Now, I'm not talking getting stuck in the scroll on social media, right? Because don't get me wrong, we can go, I'll do that for 10 minutes and then 4 hours goes by.
Yeah.
But the difference with engagement and flow compared to just like distraction or repression or those sort of like mindless tasks is you feel a sense of joy or accomplishment afterwards. I don't know that many people who scroll social media for 2 hours and then afterwards go, I'm really proud that I did that. Right. Whereas when we're immersed in something challenging, something that stretches us, something that's meaningful to us, and we lose sense of self and time in that, normally afterwards we go, God, I'm glad I did that. And so finding what your flow activity is and doing more of that. I get a lot of that in nature and hiking. Some people resonate with that. But finding what makes you lose sense of self and time and be fully present, really powerful step towards a happier life.
Yeah.
The third one of the 6 is relationships. And this is arguably the most important, the longest running study on happiness ever. It's still going to today. Um, Found that the biggest contributor to how happy people felt their life was how well connected their closest relationships were. And unfortunately, it's the one that we're suffering most with as a society. Like we're living through a loneliness epidemic. We're
Mm.
living through a time where people are more quote unquote connected than ever thanks to social media, but they're more lonely than ever because they're lacking depth and honesty and vulnerability and trust. And so nurturing those really close relationships, you don't need a lot of them, but just having a few that you're like, these are my people. I really enjoy spending time with them. I know they're there for me. I used to believe that happiness was an inside job. It needed to be done entirely on my own.
Hmm.
And I still believe that happiness is your responsibility. But by God, do I know now that happiness might start inside each and every one of us, but it's nurtured between us. It's
Yeah.
nurtured and grown collectively, right? And so that's kind of the first half. If you go, hey, I'm going to do things that make me feel good, that I lose sense of self and time in, and I have really good relationships, man, you're 50% of the way there. You're already
Yeah.
looking strong.
Yeah.
And then to bring home the last half, we have meaning and purpose. Now, this doesn't mean solving the big question of what's the purpose of my life. Although if you can do that, happy days, go for it. It's more just like find meaning and purpose in the day-to-day tasks.
Yeah.
You know, find the reason you're doing things. Simon Sinek has the whole start with why movement. And
Yep.
there was a viral video years ago about a Navy admiral who said he'd make his bed every single morning because it meant if the rest of the day went horribly, he knew he'd accomplished something.
Yep.
That sort of approach of like finding why you do something and having meaning and purpose massively increases happiness. And then our last two are accomplishment and achievement. So setting goals, doing things that make you feel like you've achieved something for the day. If you're the kind of person who writes to-do lists and gets a little bit of joy out of ticking that to-do list off, that's
Mm-hmm.
accomplishment and achievement happening. And the last but not least, and this one was only added in recently over the last few years, when they first came up with the Perma model, it was just the five that we've just listed. But they've recently added in health, which
Mm.
I personally think as a happiness researcher is a really good move. We're finding more and more that mental health and physical health are really tightly intertwined,
Yep.
that our mind and body are really linked. And so doing things that look after your health and well-being, that help you feel energetic and well in life, uh, inevitably has a positive impact on your brain, your psychology, and your happiness. So in terms of the question of, how do we define happiness? I think everyone has to define their own sentence. I've
Yep.
spent many years shaping mine and coming up with one that works really well for me. But if you want a framework to start with those 6 steps.
Yep.
And for all the listeners, you can even just go back and listen to those 6 steps, write them down, and go, if I was to give myself a score out of 1 to 5 on each of them at the moment, which ones am I doing really well at and why? What's making it strong? Which ones are my growth areas that need a bit of love and attention? And what am I going to do about growing them over the next, say, 3 to 6 months? There's your starting point.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to go back to one of them that you said, I think it was the third one, relationships, or the fourth, relationships.
Yeah.
How do you think that's sort of changed? And obviously, I think it's gotten more difficult post-COVID, because you talked about that connectiveness, and then and you speak to, you get into businesses and work with a lot of staff and employees. And how do you find that, or what's your view on the balance between, the work from home in the office? Because you naturally, I'm in Melbourne, and we went through one of the biggest lockdowns in the world,
Yeah.
and was working from home for a very, very long time. And
Mhm.
like, mind you, I love being in the office. Like, I love the energy, love being around people. Like, do a day from home and that's enough for me, but I get bored quite easily. But then I know there's other people that are just like, nah, I don't want to get back in that office at all and just want to stay at home. I'm, quote unquote, more productive, which I think some people are, but also some people are not. Yeah, how do you feel like that's shifted, and has that made it more difficult since COVID's kicked in and the whole shift there?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think part of the challenge there is, it was interesting. I was reading a study last year as part of my master's thesis, and it found that the number one contributor to how people felt about their work was whether or not they felt they had a best friend at work. Like, do you
Mm,
have someone that you genuinely enjoy working with? That
sure.
you show up and you're like, man, my day's just better because we're working together, right?
Mm,
It feels like we're part of a team. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, I grew up playing basketball, so I refer to it as sometimes like the Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen combo. Like, do we
Yeah.
have, this team where I'm like, we're achieving great things, we're doing great work, but man, we do well together,
Yeah.
right? And I think there's a gap there off the back of COVID where we're not able, don't get me wrong, you can still do the work from home and you can do the work virtually, but that depth, that connection, that camaraderie, that teamwork, that those little collaboration moments that happen when you're in person together, that spark of innovation, that's harder to do from home. It's
Yeah.
possible, but it is harder. And so I think what organizations need to focus on now is being really intentional about how they cultivate the strengths of working from home, because there are definitely a lot of strengths,
Yep.
and the strengths of being in a team and in office together, and get both being nurtured. Anytime I'm asked about the work from home versus work in office environment, I go back to the same thing, which is every single study on this so far has found that the thing that trumps either of those options is self-determination and autonomy.
Mm,
Now, what that means is, do your employees and does your team feel like they have a say in how they work best?
mm-hmm.
It's, do we give people the opportunity to go, hey, this is what the expectations of your role are. This is the outcomes we're looking for.
Yep.
How do you feel you're going to best meet those in terms of a blend of work in office, collaborate with your team versus work from home, focus work time? And let's trial that for 3 months. And if
Yep.
something's not working, let's have a conversation again. And I think the challenge is a lot of organizations, leaders, media, society, they're looking for the silver bullet, one size fits all. Even
Yep.
with things like the 4-day work week, right? They're
Yep.
looking for what's the one thing that's going to fit every industry, every role, every occupation. It doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? And the reality is it's harder to have those conversations as a leader consistently to go, these are the expectations. This is what the outcomes are we're looking for. How do we best support you and set you up? And how do you best work? And let's check in on that in 3 months to see if it's actually playing out as we intended.
Yeah.
That's harder to do, but way more beneficial.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great approach and definitely a hot topic in today's environment. But I like the sixth one that you said that was added in around health, because I'm a huge believer a healthy body is a healthy mind, and if you can't and a lot of the work that we do as financial advisors around setting these future goals and where we want to be in life, but ultimately if you're not looking after the system and the body along the way, well, like you're never going to get there in the first place. You're never going to be there to enjoy it, and that probably coincides exactly with the mindset and part of what then you do as well, because if you get there, or if you're struggling along the way, you're probably not going to be making the right decisions. And it's I think the mind's probably the most powerful one that you need to be able to master, and because of that is then by far the hardest one to master as well. But you got back from a trip, so you went on a 5-month travel sabbatical, and you
Yeah.
spoke to a lot of different people there. And whether there's some themes of what you've seen that people were, that genuinely, were happy in their life, whether these common threads and themes that you'd seen, and probably relates to, the six items that you just went through before. But what did you see, and what were some of your takeaways from that trip?
Yeah, so it was an incredible journey. I spent 5 months or close to 5 months in South America with my wife,
Wow.
going up the west coast of South America. And prior to that, I'd spent some time in India and other countries, just as part of this longer project for myself of studying global happiness and understanding the cultural differences to
Yeah.
happiness and different ways different people in different societies define and approach what it means to live a good and happy life. And what was interesting is I found that no matter our differences, like no matter age, background, gender, religion, culture, like all these different people I was asking, basically every single person, when I said, what does a happy life look like to you? Tell me what happiness is. Nearly every single one of them mentioned someone else. So it comes back
Mm.
to that relationship part and that connection part. Nearly every single one of them mentioned some form of contribution to others as well. And I think there's a lot of wisdom here in we've been going through an era for about 100 years now of self-help. How do I help myself be happier? Which I think is important. But what I'm really interested now is community help. How do I not only help myself be happier, but how do I help my community be happier? Because all of the research shows that when we feel like we're making a positive impact on someone else's life,
Yeah.
be it you're making a positive impact on your client's life or your teammates or your colleagues or your friends, family, partner, whatever it may be, we tend to feel a bit happier as well, provided we're doing it in a way that is sustainable and healthy and we're not just burning ourselves out
Mm.
giving, right? There are some context to it. But it was interesting to find that all these different people I was asking, and then I had to learn Spanish pretty quickly whilst I was over there to have these interviews and conversations, because there were some
Yeah.
areas where we had no translate available and I was like, time to learn another language.
Yeah.
um, but it was interesting to find that there were these common threads and then these really beautiful, distinct differences where people
Yeah.
would go, this is what makes me really happy. I'm like, I hadn't thought of that before. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then do you then find, and something I always find fascinating, I haven't done in-depth research in it, but from if you look at the more successful people, if we're talking from a wealth point of view, obviously, we're in the sort of the money business and game. Do you tend to find that those that are more successful and or maybe somewhat happier in a life didn't necessarily come from a good upbringing? Like kind of like you said, you kind of worked through some issues of your own in your early years. So it wasn't just all sunshine and rainbows growing up and you're just this happy guy, but you tend to come from, a bit of struggle and pain in the past. Or do you sometimes have you come across people that no, they've just had a good life and that's how they are? Or do you think there is something in the struggle and going through adversity and then coming out the other end of that and being a stronger and better person, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I'll sort of answer it this way.
Yeah.
If you think of the skills that are associated with happiness, these things previously called soft skills, we call them human skills now because they are what make us different to artificial intelligence. Things like
Yep.
emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion, like all these different things, resilience and grit. Like these are inherent skills. You can learn them. But the vast majority of us learn nothing about them in our formalized education path. Like at high school, primary school. These days, they're starting to do a bit more. They're teaching mindfulness, they're teaching stress management.
Yep.
But geez, we learned nothing about that when we were at school. So,
Yep.
okay, you didn't learn these skills that lead to a happy life and to managing your mind and emotions well. You didn't
Mhm.
learn them at school. So then where else do we learn them? Well, we hope that we're one of the lucky people who had really emotionally intelligent parents growing up.
Mm.
Now, bless our parents' heart. Most of them are doing the best they can with what they have. But I'll tell you what, when I go to rooms and I speak at conferences, I say, okay, put your hand up if you learn about these at school. Barely anyone puts their hand up. I go,
Yep.
put your hand up if you had really emotionally intelligent parents who could teach you these skills at home. Next to no one puts their hand up.
Yep. Can
And
imagine.
so I go, okay, well, where are we learning them from then? Right. And so I think in answer to your question about like, is there value to adversity and challenge? I think there is in the sense that it gives us space and opportunity to work on those skills,
Mhm.
right? Having that challenge and that difficulty, that gives us space to work on our understanding of ourselves, to work on our grit, resilience, our goal setting, our behavior change techniques, all these skills that matter. Whether or not we rise to the occasion and take advantage of that space is a whole different conversation. And that comes back to, do we have the support networks needed to take advantage of it? I wouldn't
Yep.
be the man I am today had I not reached out for help when I was in
Yep.
and out of hospital at 19 and going, hey, I need to learn from other people. Like, I
Mm.
can't do this myself. And so I say, if you're going to take advantage of challenge and adversity and have the space to become a better human from it, it comes back to get good people in your corner,
Yep.
right? Like, learn from people. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? And give yourself patience to practice it. So often with these skills, people try them once, and I was the same. When I first was hearing about how good meditation and mindfulness was, I'll admit I tried it for a week and I went, "This sucks. I'm not doing it. It's not good for me." When realistically, I just sucked at meditation. Meditation didn't suck. I sucked at that skill, right?
Yep.
And I think with these human skills, people either go, I'm confident or I'm not. I'm a good public speaker or I'm not. I'm empathetic or I'm not. I manage my emotions well or I don't. And they don't give themselves the space and the time to get better at it. But if you flip that to any other skill, and I've never met someone in my life who picked up the guitar and went, I'm going to have one lesson and be Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And if I'm not, then obviously guitar's not for me. They go, I'm going to suck at guitar for a while and get better. It's the
Mm.
same with managing our mind and emotions. You will suck at it for a while, but if you practice enough and you have some good people in your corner guiding you, you will get better at it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the struggles with society today is just the impatience. Like we all want it
Yeah.
yesterday. We don't want to put in the work. And I think to your point though, the environment's a huge one. And I'm a massive believer. And I know when my life changed is when I started hanging around, getting away from the people I was hanging around
Mm,
during high school. And the saying, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Like I'm
yep.
a huge believer in that. And then I had to go through a bit of a journey in my own life and cut out people. And I just did it
Mm,
through not from anyone telling me that's what you should do. It's just my life naturally just gravitated and went that way because I knew where I was going. I'm like, oh, the people I'm hanging around with, they're probably not on the same path, and they're sort of holding me back a little bit here. And my life just changed for the better. But I know for a lot of people, that's definitely a starting point is to actually look at that inner circle of people around you, and are they detractors or are they actually adding energy to you? And sometimes that can be a hard decision of, in my opinion, like your family. Like you got to take a good hard look at your family because that's probably who you're going to be spending a lot of time with, and then your friends. And a part of that process might be getting away from them in a way. And like you said, like getting out and touching and finding mentors, like you said, Seb, and other people. Like I totally think that's a crucial part. But what about then, for a lot of clients that we work with, we're setting these big long-term goals. And even for one in my own journey, I've got these big goals, aspirations, done a lot of things, but always seeking more and always trying to find the next thing. So how do you ever, and I always put it akin to like climbing a mountain. You get to the peak, and then it's like, well, where do you go? You kind of come back down, and then what are you finding next? So how do you kind of manage that happiness and that cycle of you get the thing, and then what? And is that a vicious cycle to go through of always, progressing and wanting more? Or how do you say that for clients that have these long-term goals and objectives? How do you manage the happiness along that journey? How do you do it?
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned mountaineering and that sort of something. Mountaineering is something that's been a big part of my life.
Yeah.
When I was that insecure people chameleon, sort of like no sense of self or self-worth, young teenager, I went, what's something that's going to make me worthy and make me happy? Well, if I summit the highest mountain in the world, maybe then I'll be worth something. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
awesome.
said, I'll climb Everest one day. And it was from such an unhealthy space to set that goal.
Mm.
But I reached out to some companies and said, hey, what do you need to see from me for me to be a good candidate to climb Everest healthily and safely and not just throw money at it and be at risk to the rest of the team? And they said, well, we need to see you climb some big ass mountains. And so hence I went and did Everest Base Camp with Seb and some other people in his community. I've done Kilimanjaro in Africa. I recently made an attempt at a 6,000 meter peak in Bolivia whilst I was over there.
Wow.
Mountaineering has always been part of my life, and I'll never forget this lesson that one of our guides gave us in Nepal. He said, what is the goal of mountaineering? What's the goal of being here? And so many people said to reach the summit. Like,
Yeah.
that's the purpose. That's why we're here. And he goes, wrong. The goal is to get off this mountain alive.
Mm.
The summit's second best. Most people who die mountaineering die because they're so focused on the achievement, the accolades, the summit point, they don't conserve what they need to get back down. And I think that's a really beautiful metaphor for life, because so often people sacrifice happiness in the pursuit of success. And through my eyes, I've met a lot of incredibly successful people who are bitterly unhappy with their life.
Yeah.
And in my perspective, that is the greatest failure any of us could have, by far.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against setting big goals. I think it's more important, though, to go, A, are the goals you're setting even yours? Do they even matter to you? Or are you just doing it because you think it's what you're meant to do next?
Sure.
Right. And B, how do we cultivate happiness along the way? I mentioned before, I said everyone needs to come up with their own sentence for what happiness means for them. For me, over the years, I've shaped it to be a happy life for me is when I'm feeling deeply fulfilled and content with who I am in this chapter of my life. But at the same time, I have compelling goals that I'm drawn towards. I've got a lot left that I want to do in this world and in this life, but I'm no longer hinging my happiness on it. If it was to all end
Yeah.
today, the business was to collapse, touch wood, if I was to pass away today, hopefully none of that happens, but I'd be okay.
Mm.
And that's taken years to get to.
Yeah.
Years. Right? Because my self-worth, my sense of self, my happiness is not based on any of these external things that can be taken away. I mean, how many business owners do we know who their whole sense of self was tied to their success in their business, and then COVID came along and decimated their industry for 3
Yep.
years,
Yep.
right? And so I think if we can come back to how do we form deep contentment and gratitude right here and now? And a way to do that is literally practice gratitude. Again, practice it like a skill. Know that you're going to suck at it for a while. But so often we're looking for, especially as business owners, man, like our brains are wired to look for what can we do better? What's
Yep.
wrong? What needs to be fixed? What's the next step? How do we get there? We're very goal-oriented achievement. Someone said to me, the problem of being such a problem-solving oriented person is you always need a problem to solve. And I think
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Sure.
many business owners have
Yeah.
that. They're like, I'm
Yeah.
so good at solving problems. I'm like, and what happens when there's
Yeah.
no problems? How
Yeah.
do you go
Yeah.
with just slowing down and being happy? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh man, I
Exactly.
can't do it when I freak out. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, because they're looking for another problem. And so
Yeah.
what
It's a
we need
great
to be able
point.
to do is go, hey, that's a skill. Let's keep that. You're really, really skilled at being a problem solver. You're really skilled at goal setting. You're really skilled at being a high achiever. Well, now you need to practice the skills of contentment. You need to practice the
Mm.
skills of gratitude. You need to practice the skills of connection. Balance those skills out.
And I think that kind of answers what I was going to lead you into there was, does increased wealth or income correlate to happiness? And
It
do
does to
you,
a degree.
yeah? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Yep.
it does. Yeah. I used to be the guy that was like, money doesn't buy happiness.
Yep.
Until it was rightly pointed out to me that it's a very privileged thing to say.
Mm.
Like, the only people who say money doesn't buy happiness are people who aren't worried about having a roof over their head or food on the table.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
Like, realistically, money buys happiness up to a point, then it starts to level out. Now,
Sure.
you go back quite a few years, we need to take inflation into the rates of this, but quite a few years ago, about a decade ago, they did a big study and they went, what's the amount? What's the exact amount people need to make where money's no longer directly contributing to their happiness? And it was roughly 75 to 90,000 Australian a year as an individual. Now, take inflation into account, maybe that's closer to like 90 to 100 these days. But I know so many people who are chasing more and more and more and more than that. I know people who are, doing jobs where they make 140, 150,000 a year, but they're
Mm.
bitterly unhappy. They're never
Yeah.
home with their family and kids. They hate the job that they're doing. It's, the golden handcuffs of like they've got stuck chasing this wealth, thinking it buys more happiness. It really doesn't. So I
Yeah.
will say, like, money does buy happiness up to a point. After that, it depends what you do with it. And
Mm.
so far, from decades of research in this space, there's only three things. I like to call this the happiness vending machine. You imagine a vending machine you can put money into and get actual happiness out of. There's only three items in that vending machine. Right? The first one is growing yourself in some way. So learning new skills, looking after your health, like we spoke about, right?
Yep.
Some form of like self-development is a big part of our happiness, right? The second part is is experiences. So rather than buying material possessions, it's like, say, going to a concert, seeing a live event, travel, like something that becomes a
Yeah.
memory. So memories and experiences. First one's personal growth and development. Second one is memories and experiences. And then the third one is altruism, which is giving back, supporting other
Mm.
people, contributing to a cause that matters to you. And so I say to everyone I know, I'm like, hey, if you want to buy happiness, but if speaking of financial planning, I'm not a financial planner in any way, but I'm like, hey, if you haven't put those three things into your budgeting, because normally when we look at budgeting, we look at survival needs and we look at material goods. And not many people go, hang on, what am I investing into myself? What am I investing into memories and experiences? And what am I contributing to others? You
Yeah.
put those three in, you're going to get a better return on investment for happiness. I'll promise you that much.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of looking at it. And the way I always think about money, because you always hear, money is the root of all evil, and there's all these different
Mm.
ways that you can sort of say that quote. But I truly believe money is just an amplifier of it. Just
Yep.
amplifies who you are. And
Yeah.
if you're out there to try and do positive and make a positive change and impact on the world, well, money's going to actually allow you to do more of that.
Yeah.
And I think if you take the view, like I sometimes feel, and so it can be quite hard for people to understand when I say this, and I say, look, if you're not actually out there and trying to be the best version of yourself, earn the most money that you possibly can, in a way, you're actually being selfish, in my opinion,
Mm.
because
Mm.
that means that those around you are not going to have the opportunity available to them. Your kids are going to miss out on, maybe going to better schools or having better opportunities or more memories. So I truly believe that when done right, money can just amplify and just create a better life. But I agree there would be, a bit of a point where it just kind of hits the more dollars in the bank doesn't just keep adding to that at some point in time. So I think it's a
Mm.
it's a great way to look at it. But what about we got a lot of business owners. I personally work with a lot of business owners, obviously M1 myself, and would be keen to kind of understand a little bit about the work that you then do in that space, and how do you sort of go into a business, and how do you measure maybe the happiness or the of that team or culture, and then what are some things that you generally might, are there like some
Mm.
easy wins that business owners can look at for their team, and what do you do there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an area that's become particularly of interest to me over the last, I think, 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
I did my master's thesis in positive psychology specifically on the question, what is happiness in the workplace setting? So how
Yeah.
is it defined? How is it measured? Why is it an advantage? What I found from that research is it is undisputed that happiness is a strategic advantage for organizations. If you go back I'd say over the last 150 years, the order of priorities for organizations was priority number one, shareholders and stakeholders. So, AKA, we need to have a really good bottom line. We need really good profit because we need
Sure.
to keep our shareholders and stakeholders happy. Priority two, really happy customers. If we have a great customer service and a great customer experience, they're going to come back, they're going to refer more. Therefore, our stakeholders are going to be happier. Priority three,
Hmm.
maybe eventually, if we get around to it, happy staff, right?
Mm.
That's what it's been for about 150 years. Now, in the last couple of decades, a few pioneer researchers, Sean Aker from Harvard was one. He wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage that was finding that happy organizations actually had better stock performance. They had higher productivity. He found like happy salespeople produced 37% more sales than unhappy salespeople. So he started
Yeah.
finding all these things like, hey, happiness seems to give a competitive advantage. So he wrote The Happiness Advantage. And then another man called Tony Hasai, who was the late great CEO and founder of Zappos, the shoe company that was acquired by Amazon. So Tony Hasai started looking at that model and went, maybe we've got it backwards. Like, what would happen if we prioritize first and foremost happy staff, really great working experience, people who loved their jobs and thrived at them? Well, chances are they're going to create a really happy customer experience because we all feel it when you're talking with someone who loves their job and is good at it. Geez, it rubs off on you. It makes a
100%.
difference, right?
Yeah.
So he went, let's prioritize upskilling our staff, investing in them, making sure we create a really good employee experience. They're then going to look after our customers because at the end of the
Sure.
day, the directors and shareholders normally aren't directly working with the customers anyway, right?
Yeah.
They're running the company. So let's get great staff. Now we have happy customers. Well, hang on, the happy customers keep coming back. Lo and behold, we're getting better profit margins, right? We're
Hmm.
not spending as much on recruitment and staff turnover and burnout. We've got higher productivity and performance. Now, all of a sudden, our stakeholders and shareholders are really happy. And so we pioneered this movement to go, we need to flip our priorities.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of my work comes in. I started partnering with organizations back in 2019 um, to go, hey, highest priority needs to be staff experience here. Now, that's a nice word to say, but what does it mean? And what I
Yeah.
found from my research was there was 5 pillars. Like we had the Perma model for individual happiness that we spoke about earlier. There's these 5 core pillars for workplace happiness. First one is well-being, which is, and you can look at, in when I do analysis for organizations, I then go the next tier further, which is the 7 types of well-being. We won't get into the details of that, but like financial well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, etc. So well-being's first. Second is engagement, which is, are people confident and competent at what they do? Right? Do they have the skills to succeed? And let me tell you, it's a problem if you've got confident employees who aren't competent, right? They think they're really good, but they don't have the skills. Or if you've got really high skilled employees who aren't confident, those are
Yeah.
both problems. So we need confidence and competence for highly engaged employees. Then the third one is culture. And culture's spoken about a lot, but often not
Sure.
defined. When we look at culture, we look at vision, mission, values. We look at transparency and trust, diversity, equity, inclusion. We look at these sort of glue that holds the company together. The fourth one, I would argue, is the most important because it really influences the first three. So we have well-being, engagement, culture. Fourth one is leadership, which is, are your leaders and managers good leaders and managers? And so often people end up in leadership and management positions accidentally.
Mm.
They're thrust into it because someone left, or they're put into that position because they were the person who's been at the company for the longest. And so often, when people start a new job, they get onboarded into it. They go, these are the expectations, these are the outcomes, this is the skills we need, this is how we're going to upskill you, these are the resources we're going to give you to do your job well. That happens when people enter a role. It very rarely happens when people enter a leadership role or a
Mm.
management role. They go, you're a leader and manager now, you've got it, handle it.
Yeah.
But leading a group of people is inherently different as a set of skills to what they were doing before. The example I always give is, you can take your best salesperson. It doesn't mean they're going to be a great leader of salespeople.
Agree. Yep.
And inevitably, you might have accidentally taken your best salesperson off the field. And so
Yeah.
now your sales are going to tank and you've got an unhappy sales team because the leader's not very good.
Yeah.
So we've got to look at leadership as that fourth pillar. And then the last one, which I debated whether or not to include it, because it seems to be a lag measure of the first four. Like if the first four go well, this tends to go well as well. If the first four are bad, this one tends to go bad. The reason I kept it was it gave me an indication of time. So the last one's resiliency.
Hmm.
Things like, how resilient are we to burnout? How resilient are we to change? Because We've been through a global pandemic that led to a lot of change and challenge for business
Yeah.
owners and organizations. Now we're facing the machine learning and artificial intelligence disruption. If you think it's going to become easier over time to be a business owner, you got another thing coming.
Agree.
There's going to be more and more challenges and changes that come. So we need a team that's resilient to change, that rises to the occasion of change and doesn't crumble in the face of change. And so what I do with organizations, what came from that research, is I built a tool called the Workplace Happiness Diagnostic, where we go in once a year with a team. It takes 30 minutes staff time, and we do evidence-based anonymous surveys on all 5 of those pillars.
Yeah.
We get the data back, and then we can go to an organization and go, here's what you're doing well, here's your gaps, here's what you need to do to fix it. And it just gives them a people and culture roadmap and a strategy for 12 months on a silver platter. And what we found is there's a lot of wisdom in the saying, what is measured is managed.
Mm.
I think a lot of organizations want to do better by their people. They want to be an employer of choice.
Yeah.
They want to have people who are high performers and highly productive. But because they're not measuring the factors that create that, they're relying on guesswork at best. And at worst, they're just putting their head in the sand, hoping it's going to fix itself. So in
Yeah.
terms of a quick win, I would say to all business owners, start measuring those factors I just mentioned. Now, look, whether you do it with us or with someone else, start measuring it.
For
Right?
sure.
Obviously, we can come in and do it for you, but if you want to do it yourself, that's fine too. Just make sure you're actually asking your team about well-being, engagement, culture, leadership, and resilience. Because once you get the data back from that, once you're having those conversations, the next steps become a lot clearer.
Mate, yeah, that's awesome, Declan. And I think, we're short of time here and we'll wrap it up. But I think I could quite easily have this podcast go on and turn into a Joe Rogan podcast for 2 or 3 hours. And
we could just do 4 hours.
We could just keep going. We could just keep on going, mate. But no, I think we're going to have to organize more of these. But before we wrap it up, where can all the listeners, where can they best find you in your business?
Best bet is if you search BU Happiness College. So just the letters BU, Happiness College. Obviously on the website, we've got a bunch of free resources and tools, all the info about the Workplace Happiness Diagnostic Report and our personal happiness coaching at the college. That's all on there. The other best places are obviously on your social channels. So BU Happiness College or Declan Edwards, myself, on LinkedIn or on Instagram. They're normally the best ways.
Yeah, amazing. Well, what we'll do, guys, we'll wrap it up and we'll make sure we put all of that in the show notes. So anyone that does want to obviously reach out and engage with you, Declan, we'll make sure that does happen. But I dare say we're going to have to do another podcast because there's a lot more questions I've definitely got in store for you. But really appreciate you coming on here today, mate. And if you guys are getting value out of the podcast, please 5 stars on Apple, Spotify. And of course, if you want to chat about your personal financial situation, as always, you can jump on the website and have a chat with any of the advisors that we've got aboard. But Declan, before we finish off, mate, any final words of wisdom at all?
Mate, final words of wisdom would be just embrace the fact that happiness, be it personally or in your workplace, it's a skill, which means you can develop it, improve it, and it is a massive competitive advantage to build that skill.
Done. No, great way to close, mate. Really, really appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next one.
You're very welcome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers, mate.